Welcome to One Move at a Time, the U.S. Chess Podcast, where we highlight individuals and organizations advancing our mission to empower people, enrich lives, and enhance communities through chess. I am here with a tournament director that has decades of experience, and I'm very excited to pick his brain on best practices when it comes to issues as a tournament director. Harold Stenzel, how are you doing today?
Doing fine.
Let's go ahead and dive right into some questions. So, how did you first get started in chess, and what drew you into tournament directing?
Okay. Well, I learned when I was 8 from my 12-year-old cousin, who as an adult admitted that she taught me so she could beat me at something and never played me when I became an adult. But I played a little bit with like relatives and neighbors. And then I tried my chess team in high school, didn't make the team, and went out for track and field, and then didn't get involved really in chess until 1972 when Fisher Spassky was dominating PBS 5 hours a day, 3 days a week. And I watched and thought, gee, I can play moves like that. And the easy ones I could. I didn't realize the hard ones and what went into it. But when that match ended, I saw something in my college newspaper about a master coming to give a simultaneous exhibition. So I signed up, and 12 players showed up, and he beat everybody, but I had the moral victory of losing last. So I said, well, maybe I'm better than I think I am, and I signed up for my college chess championship, and there was a 32-player elimination, best 2 out of 3 each round, and I went 10-0, and I was college chess champion, and I was a little surprised. I thought that there must have been somebody better, but there wasn't. And then I joined another chess club, and then when I graduated college, I joined another club. That was the Nassau Chess Club. That was in June of 1975, and so I'm still a member of the club over 50 years later. My first year there, they were running small tournaments, and I asked the president of the club if I could run one, and he said, sure, run them all. And so I ran my first tournament in early 1976. As I was an assistant at a quad, which is about as easy as it gets to direct. And then after that, he let me plan one of my own. It was a 5-round Swiss, which I directed and played in because I like to play. And after that, I was pretty much running just about every tournament there. I found out, unfortunately, about a year later, the reason he wanted me to run him is that he unfortunately was terminally ill, and so he was just looking for somebody to take over the club. So I guess I took him literally because I'm still doing it 50 years later. So that's how I got involved, and then I started running tournaments in other places. I worked for a bank, so I ran tournaments in the bank league, and so that's kind of how it grew. But I had a full-time job at the bank at the time, so chess was just my hobby. But in 2000, my bank offered me the choice of keep your job, but you have to move to Florida, and I'm still in New York. So I was looking for jobs. 2000 was a bad year in the economy. So then what ended up happening is I said, well, let me do what I know best. Next thing I knew, it was growing. I was getting more teaching classes, private lessons. People were hearing about me that I was looking for directing jobs. And I direct a lot of tournaments each year. I think my biggest year was the year after COVID. It hasn't quite recovered yet, but I ran like 87 tournaments in 1 year, which, considering I have an affiliate that only runs about a dozen a year, that's quite a few tournaments. I'm currently listed, I think, as the certified director for 17 different affiliates on the U.S. Chess TD and affiliate page. So I have a lot of employers.
Oh, that's impressive. I mean, you definitely have the experience of running into different things. So I'm very excited to pick your brain. And along with being a national master and international arbiter, what in your mind is your greatest chess accomplishment?
Well, the one I'm most proud of is in 1993, I was captain and board 3 on the U.S. Amateur Team Championship My team went 6-0 in the regionals in the East, which is the toughest one to get through because we have usually more teams than the other three combined. And then winning in the finals, we won by half a game point. The team from California and us both had 2.5 out of three because we drew each other. But we had the half point extra, and I kind of like to give myself credit for knowing the rules because I drew a lost game because my opponent didn't understand the threefold repetition rule as well as I did. And I called it on him, and he denied it. And after a while, myself and the tournament director there convinced him that, yes, it was three times. So,
Who else was on your team?
the name of my team was Bonin, the USA. And one of your previous interviews was with Jay Bonin, my board one. My board two now lives in Florida. His name is Mark Ritter. And our fourth board was a judge from Huntington, West Virginia, who I found out through a chess club friend of mine who played correspondence with him and said he'd like to play. And he was really our ace in the hole because he had a 1600 rating but played like an 1800 because he didn't play that many tournaments over the board. So he was instrumental. It's good to have a good board four. We came in at 2199 and a half because I manipulated the ratings with the players, but it worked out well.
It's a small world, the chess community. I mean, just recently having an interview with Jay, and then I played against Mark Ritter in Florida. So I know personally 3 out of 4 of those that played on the team. And I believe that 93 has the distinction that it was the last time it was settled in person. We've been doing it online for amateur team ever since.
Yeah, I believe it's the first and last because former U.S. chess president at the time, Don Schultz, had arranged for a site in Baltimore where we met. And they paid for our hotels and our transportation to get there. And, but it's an amateur thing, so all we did is we got like plaques. But it was an enjoyable experience, and I think that's my greatest chess accomplishment. But it's a team effort. When my team didn't play well, I played well. When I didn't play well, they held me up. As a matter of fact, I think I was the lowest score between the 9 rounds. But I mean, I held my own. I think I was like 50% over the 9 games. So,
What do you remember about your very first tournament directing, training, and tests?
well, the first thing is you just sign it. You read the rule book, which I did, and the training was the president of the club who let me run the first one as an assistant at a quad. I would just say something, and if he agreed, which he pretty much always did, he said, yeah, do it that way. And I just got more confidence by doing it. It was a small tournament. It was quads. I mean, I don't remember how many there were, but I think the first tournament I ran on my own had 21 players. So we started off small.
And what was your first major tournament that you directed, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, by major, I think you probably mean with a large attendance.
Yes.
I was asked to work at several New York State scholastics back in the 80s and even the early 90s. We were getting 200 players, which is a far cry from what it is now. I think this past year we had 1,700 on one weekend and 200 on another because we couldn't fit them all on one weekend.
Wow.
So, it started off with 200. And there's a little bit. That was back in the days of pairing cards and no sudden death, no time delay, no increment. So it ended up being a little bit more of time scrambles at the end that make the next time control and so on. But it was interesting, and I kind of had the advantage, I think, in that in New York State, a lot of the teams are in New York City, but I'm in Long Island. So it's kind of like makes me an outsider, but it also makes me kind of neutral because a lot of the top directors and players and coaches, and they have their own biases. They have their own teams there. But I was kind of an outsider because I don't really coach a team. I do teaching, but it's usually just classes. It's not as prep to go to some tournament.
So with your decades of experience, what do you believe is the most effective way to combat cheating in over-the-board play?
Well, now we're talking over the board because it's a little bit different from online, but very often it's just idiosyncrasies, things that don't make sense. Paying attention if the player is like shifty eyes, looking all over the place, maybe they're looking to see if somebody's watching them, things like that. And I try to be very discreet and don't say anything until I'm quite sure. Let them do whatever they want and bury themselves, and then if I catch them, great. Sometimes I get complaints about cheating. Very often it's by the opponent's mother or father, and I would say about 9 out of 10 times it's crying wolf. It's somebody who played very well, or somebody who talked to somebody, even though it was something as innocent as "Can you get me a bottle of water?" And then, well, I don't know what they said there. How do I know they're not cheating? So that's. But I just look for little idiosyncrasies that don't fit, and that usually works. And also, like in big money tournaments, I especially pay attention to the top boards in the later rounds, because if they're cheating, that's where they're going to rise to the top. And when they do that, it's why are they playing hundreds of points higher than their actual rating? Sometimes it's just somebody who's underrated. Uh, I know I was doing that just at the World Open, which is the biggest money tournament I work at each year, and so I just pay attention to the top boards, make sure that there's nobody talking to somebody suspiciously. Things have changed in the year of cell phones. We get very strict at CCA, not so much at my club because first prize is usually just $100 and something, but CCA it's usually in the thousands and big tournaments in the tens of thousands. So cell phones, you get caught with a cell phone in the restroom, you lose. And so unfortunately, I know I've caught a few people who were a little bit naive, but I can't make an exception because some of them aren't naive but would claim they are if I did. So I've had to, just as recently as the Atlantic Open, we forfeited a couple of people, and I was the chief over there. And like I said, it's probably innocent, but I personally when I'm in charge, I make the announcements and say, power your cell phone down. I recommend they leave it in their chest bag or leave it in their hotel room or their car, or don't use the phone at all during the round, but some leave it in their pocket and go to the restroom. And so what am I going to do? They clearly violated the rule.
In connection with this, do you think it's time that we just get rid of spectators at tournaments? Because there's so much paranoia when it comes to cheating and cheating accusations, and a lot of it stems from spectators.
That is true. I find that the paranoia is greater at scholastic tournaments. And most scholastic tournaments, we do bar the parents and the coaches. And because they rarely come in as unbiased. I just had a recent case where a man was watching his son at an outdoor tournament, which I can't really keep them away because it was held in a park. And he gave a fist pump to his son when his son found a good move. And I went up to him and I said, you can't do that. And he argued a little bit, but then he realized I was right, that he was giving subtle hints to his son that he was telling him you just played a good move. And I don't like that. So he did come back and apologize, say I was right. But at first he didn't. So.
And for new tournament directors, in that situation, once you've had the conversation, if it happens again in a future round, what type of penalty would you go for in that situation?
Generally, depending what it is, the first time may just be a warning, because it may be something innocent, but I'm not reluctant to tell them if it happens again, I'll ban you from the playing area or something like that. It also happens with cell phones. Person's cell phone, most of the cell phone violations where they ring in the playing room, it's spectators who say, I thought I turned it off or I forgot to turn it off. Meanwhile, they had to walk past a sign that said power down your cell phones when they entered the room. But, I've gotten excuses like, oh, I didn't read that. Or I showed up late after the announcements, I didn't know. But ignorance is no excuse.
And I'd like to note, as we're moving forward through the interview, that we are definitely changing times, places, not mentioning any identifiable factors, and sometimes changing the circumstances from your experiences in order to make them instructive for tournament directors. So viewer discretion is advised, is what we could say. But that being said, touch move disputes can be tricky. Do you have any stories or lessons learned that other tournament directors could benefit from?
Yeah, one of the problems with touch move is I'm sure I've made rulings that contradicted the facts, but what I'm usually looking for is neutral witnesses. And sometimes there aren't any because a lot of times just the two people playing each other and you could be sitting right next to the person and not notice that they touched a piece or didn't touch a piece. And we generally go with the innocent till proven guilty. But I do have an amusing story from a tournament I ran several years ago on Long Island where kid came running into me. I was just on the other side of the door from where the tournament was taking place. And he says, "Oh, my teammate's father just told him to move, told him to take the queen." So I go in there and I say, "Well, where's the boy and his father?" "They're taking a walk in the hall." First thing I'm thinking is they're getting their story straight. And so I had to wait for them to come back. "Where did you go?" "Oh, we just went for a walk." I say, "Well, what happened? Did you say something?" He says, "Oh, I coughed." And the son says, "Yeah, he coughed." And the boy who had come to me to bring it to my attention was a teammate from the same school as the player who was given advice against. So I couldn't count him as a witness. He was not neutral. So I went back to the board and I took a look at the board and I was about to explain how when there's no witness, I have to go with innocent till proven guilty. And then I looked at the board. Yes, the last move was queen takes queen. There was just one problem. When he played queen takes queen, he was in check from a rook, and he couldn't take the queen because it was illegal. So at this point, I said, well, you touched the queen, you have to make a queen move to get out of check, and the only queen moves would lose the queen for free. So it's kind of instant karma where the father helped his son, because I was convinced it wasn't a cough. That's why I think they took the trip out in the hallway. And I said, well, you've got to move the queen in the way. And the father made some sort of a gasp or something when I pointed that out, because he couldn't very well go back on and say, no, I did tell him it's my fault, he doesn't have to play it, because I still would have required it because of touch move. So I would have loved to be in the car on the way home for that trip to hear what the father and son had to say between them, but no doubt in my mind that was one time where the parent did major damage to his son's game. So that's my most amusing story.
Coaches and parents sometimes get overly invested in the competition. Do you have any stories or advice on the best ways to handle those situations as a TD?
Well, some coaches are much better than others. There's one coach I know who actually at times encourages his students to do what I perceive underhanded things. He sometimes says to tell his kids to offer a draw before they resign. And on chances, sometimes the kid accepts, even in a one position. So I have to be wary of that. That's bad coaching, in my opinion. It's unethical to tell a kid who's hopelessly lost to offer a draw and then resign if it's declined. But I have to deal with different coaches different ways. Sometimes coaches think I have it in for them because I make all the rulings against their kids, not considering that, well, the kid isn't going to complain that I made a good ruling for him, only a bad ruling. So they only get the complaints. So I jokingly say that I only get half my decisions right because it depends which player you talk to. So, but dealing with coaches, I think most of them respect me. But like I said, there are a couple who think I have it in for them because kids complain to them.
Yeah, as you're telling the story, it comes to mind, I would say, a cultural bad etiquette show the Searching for Bobby Fischer movie in the early 90s, the final game as a draw is being offered. The proper etiquette, I think, was lost for the better part of a generation there, as many would just stick out their hand, offer a draw at any point in time.
Yeah.
So I definitely like to talk about that. And do you have any experiences?
I have something to say about that.
All right.
I call it meeting of the minds. A lot of kids don't know how to offer draws. The proper procedure is make your move, make your offer, press the clock in that exact order. But I have kids who extend their hand and say nothing. Now, that's more common characteristic of resignation than offering a draw. So I've had a few cases where one player extend the hand, the other one shakes it, they go to post their results, and one guy puts down draw, and the other guy says, I thought you were resigning. So I've had a few of those. The standard answer is, since they don't agree on a draw, go back and finish the game. And that pretty much works. Although I know in one case, I had that at the World Open. And I think the guy complained that while they thought it was a draw, that gave him his opponent time to find the win. Although I thought it was more clear than that he didn't need time to find it. It was obvious, but this was in a lower section. So what I see right away, they might not. So
another question that I have that comes to mind is, I started playing chess in the early 2000s, and I never experienced an adjournment. So do you have any experience with adjournments, and what do you say the pros and cons are compared to what we have today?
Well, I like the idea of finishing the game in one session, but that only works now because of sudden death. I think when I first played in CCA tournaments, that was my first experience, they would have like a primary time control, and then it would be 20 moves per hour, 20 moves per hour, 20 moves per hour for like forever. And I think my longest game ever was like over 7 hours in a tournament there, which ended up in a draw, and it was adjourned, and then we had to go back. But it was that doesn't happen now. But with adjournments, there is the ability to go and study the position depending on how it works out. I know that I had an adjournment once at a local club, and I think I was Bishops of Opposites, and I analyzed it to death, and then I sat down for the resumption, and I won the game, and my opponent said, I was so sure it was drawn, I didn't study it. And that was my overnight, well, it wasn't overnight, it was over a week, because it was a once-a-week club. But I had a week to go over it, and I knew if I could get to a certain position, I was going to win. But the other guy, he said, well, it's Bishops of Opposites. And he just didn't study it. But that was because of an adjournment. I don't know if I would have won if it was in one session.
It's an interesting concept. I have players go back and forth in the debate. Were players of the generation that went through adjournments and had to deeply analyze endings, especially with stronger players, and if you had a good group of players to work with, were they better because of their experience in endings compared to now, or all the resources that we have, is that a bigger advantage modern day?
Oh, that's a good question. I found that, in a way, having an adjournment inspired me to study the position. And it probably made me better in those positions, where if I'm playing it in one sitting, I got to find it over the board, and finding it over the board, there's more room for error because you don't get to take it back when you make a bad move and analyze a different line. So, I mean, I'm fine with a long session. I think I have good endurance, but I know some players, they get kind of bogged down in the fourth hour of a game, and probably adjournment would do them good.
And I'd like to come back to, we were discussing over the board cheating, but as we are doing more online events and hopefully we can have more U.S. chess online rated events. What do you think is best practices when it comes to anti-cheating measures for online chess?
Well, I did during COVID work as an online director, and I caught some notable cheaters. And what I what we did in the tournaments is we did them on Zoom. They were playing through a one of the online chess companies, but they were required to have a camera that would show their screen, their keyboard, their hands, and I was looking for idiosyncrasies, and I found quite a few. Online, I think the biggest thing that was a suspicion was why are they looking at the screen more when that's not their move than when it is? Because when I play chess, I'm looking at the board, and they were looking more at the board when it wasn't their turn. And so what it was is they were looking around a lot when it was their own move, but not at the board because they had somewhere hidden another screen with the position on it. And that was like a big red flag. Why would you be looking away from the board when it's your turn? And of course, they also ran it through some algorithms, and there's a very well noted PhD, I think, from New York, who they would give the questionable games to, and he would point out that this is highly suspicious. And they would use like 4 standard deviations, which is a pretty high one. If you're more than 4 standard deviations against the norm for your rating, that you're almost definitely cheating, because everybody has one good game, but when you're doing it every round, it defies probability.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So if you could impart any wisdom to organizers and TDs that we haven't touched upon so far, what would it be?
Well, there are some things that are not in the rule book that I do, and I find it effective to do because, in a way, it's preparing for what could go wrong. And one of the things I like to do is at the start of the round, I go to every board and make sure the clock is set correctly. I mean, I've had times where the clock wasn't equal, but more often it's the wrong time control, where they're playing too fast or too slow. And if you play in a lot of these places, you have a curfew that the game has to finish by, because it's either the last game of the day or you got another game after that. You got to get all the games done. So I check that, and a lot of directors don't think of that, and I think that's important to do. Also, another thing I do in big tournaments, I check and take attendance. I would say that 1 out of 5 games that is won on forfeit, the player who won on forfeit forgets to put the F there. They don't understand the significance that the F means forfeit. And then what happens is if that's not caught, then the player who forfeited gets paired again, and 2 people win on forfeit. So I check that and make sure that it's posted correctly when I go and look on the pairing sheets to see if they wrote it. And some directors don't do it. I like to go a little above and beyond and avoid problems going ahead. So that's some of the things I do. I inspect other things. I'm looking for, and I hate to say it, but in this decade, I sometimes look to see if they're wearing anything on their head. Like if they're wearing a hoodie, is there an earpiece underneath that hoodie? So I look for things like that. I mean, I don't usually find anything, which is good, I guess, but I do want to keep an eye on that. And we've caught some people with devices and going to the restroom, and some people try to circumvent the restroom rule by putting their phone in a hidden place in the restroom and then going there between moves. And we caught a couple people like that too. What is this abandoned cell phone doing hidden in the restroom? And if you get caught, you can't really come and say, did you find my cell phone? Because then you're just admitting that you were cheating. And so I know there was one time where a phone got confiscated and the person who we thought it belonged to never came and asked for it. And I think we know why. So
It comes to mind, I've had students that are easily distracted, when I began playing 20 plus years ago now, in my first few years, I would listen to music while playing, say an iPod Touch with a click wheel. Those older edition iPods, in order to have any sort of chess program on it, you would have to cycle through all 64 squares, select, cycle back through where you wanted to move. It's nothing like the touchscreen apparatuses we have today. So the chances of cheating on those old devices were almost zero. But I recommend to students to have earplugs now, as there's no rule to my knowledge against those. And how do you
just
feel?
to muffle the sound, right?
What's
just
that?
To muffle the just to muffle the sound, you mean?
Yeah, just because at large tournaments, especially national scholastics, there can be all of these distracting noises all around you, and some students prefer to have these. But do we have any rules currently on the books when it comes to listening to music? I know at some major tournaments we say it's an absolute no-no, no device, etc. But is this something general or something we should be looking at eliminating in the future?
Well, I don't like the idea of playing music. At first, when that habit happened, my philosophy was if I could hear it walking by, it's too loud. And there were a few people who would do it, but at this point, it's considered an electronic device, so the answer is no. And I think that's easier because one thing I haven't said is I'm also on the ethics committee, and we get complaints about cheating. So I see far more than my share of cheating complaints, even if I'm not in the board on the staff of the tournament, but I do see it when somebody complains about it. And so, we now have metal detectors or electronic detectors, and they beep if you have something on it. And there's been a few that came before the committee. As a matter of fact, that's probably the plurality of our complaints these days, is electronic cheating.
That is interesting. So to close us out before I jump to the provided game for analysis, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, as a director, I would say this. I find that I'm very often the next level of appeal on something. I try not to get the story from the floor director. I'm like a chief floor director or sometimes a computer director. I try to go and establish my own facts, and that stops me from being biased by a lower level director, because it also gives the advantage of somebody has to say whatever it is a second time. And that's a good way to catch liars, because they have no visual image of what they lied about, so it's harder to remember. So sometimes they change their stories. So I try to go in with a fresh thought on that, and I do catch a lot of cheaters because they do change their stories. And I've noticed some cases where the story morphs when I point out something that's inconsistent. A couple of years ago, I had a guy who claimed that he never let go of his queen in a king and queen versus king ending, where if he had let go on the square that his opponent claimed, it would have been a stalemate. But he also admitted that his opponent had demonstrated that was a stalemate, so it made no sense that she would prove that he was stalemating her while the game was still in progress. She would wait till he let go of it. But he insisted that he never let go. But I ruled against him because it just didn't make sense. But that was like the typical cheating lie. He admitted the fact that she pointed out that it was a stalemate. Why would she do that while it was in progress? And I ruled against him, and I never heard a thing. And I figured, since this was a state scholastic, he would have gone to a coach or a parent, and I never got a complaint because I think he knew that he got caught. But he tried. So.
Well, I sincerely appreciate you being a guest on One Move at a Time.
Okay, thank you.
We have an interesting example game here from the 90s where Harold accomplished something that few chess players do. He was able to defeat a grandmaster over the board. let's go ahead and get into this game that is a French defense. And we have a tirage. And here, the branches with modern theory, typically knight d7 and bishop d7 are recommended. Knight d7 has the lion's share to be able to follow up to play knight gf6. And probably my favorite player to study from these positions is Grandmaster Georg Meyer. He's just a machine with playing these positions with black, hyper accurate, and is one of the leading theoreticians in this position. And also, if you're going with typical themes within the French defense where we've got our bad bishop, you also have the Fort Knox variation, which runs bishop d7, followed by bishop c6, where you're looking at the right moment to trade off the French bishop, the bad bishop, in the position, and then we can go back to means. And I know Grandmaster Keith Arkell has a number of good example games in this variation. So we get an interesting position here with knight c6, and I'll be honest, this is something that I had never seen before. So it's a good playing to solve how you would react if a master plays this against you early in the opening, the d-pawn is hit. So if we know that knight d7 and bishop d7 are the main lines by far, and this rare move is played, you have to question, is there something wrong with it? Don't move until you see it, take your time, etc. But first, we need to figure out a way to handle the problem, which is there is pressure on the d-pawn. So what is the most flexible way? Well, we could defend with bishop, pawn, knight. And there's a couple of different ways for the knight. And when breaking down these types of positions to students, I like to think of it as there are multiple ways to solve a given problem. Mastery in chess is solving it the best way. And that's where you're going to see different levels of chess players. Using the bishop or a pawn is going to limit options for the future. So the most flexible move is knight f3. And then we have b6. And it seems like black just wants to handle the problem of the bad bishop and potentially castle queenside. This is interesting, but nothing's defending that knight on c6 anymore. So as I started analyzing, I found a correspondence game from 2010 that had very machine-like play. So let's go forward here. What is the most forcing move for white? What is the most aggressive move for white? Well, it's bishop b5. Pin the knight. So after bishop b7, you can continue to add pressure. Now queen d5. Some players would stop here because they would see that there's potential tactical problems. If you're a pause your video type person, what would you do with white here? Is knowing that this is close to a winning position for white should give you motivation to try to find best play. First, we've got two pieces attacked. Queen e2 defends that knight on e4 and bishop on b5. And after knight f6, I really like this subtle move that just keeps all the tension in the position. f3, you don't want to take. And as you attempt to run, now simplification. And finally, knight takes d8. And white went on to win this game. In the main game, we had bishop d3. And this is going to allow black to comfortably develop this bishop. There's no immediate pressure. Knight f6. Not interested in capturing this knight, as being able to capture back with the g-pawn will allow for great attacking potential in the future because of the bishop on b7. c3, very logical. Queen d7, still saying, hey, would you mind capturing on f6, giving us an open g file to work with? No? Okay, well, I'll castle queenside. White begins the attack. And this next move was a bit of a shocker for me as I went through the game. Bishop takes b4. So let's play a game of what's your evaluation here? I like to think in the numerical terms of the engine when playing the what's your evaluation game. So do you think white's a little bit better? Say a pawn up +1, a piece up +3, or is it balanced the other way? Black +1, black +3. Take your time and try to find best defense here for white. Can you take the piece? Well, if you immediately capture, we have the issue of knight takes d4, where this is a roughly balanced position with best play, but I mean, I'm starting to prefer black. So if the problem is multiple pieces being hit, maybe we can change something a little bit. Knight takes f6. And the key here is bishop c4. Why? Can you grab the rook anymore? Believe we may run into some issues here after queen takes a1. As bishop b2, we're not exactly getting enough for the piece. We can force this trade, and if it was two rooks versus the queen, this position, for instance, black's more than fine. But with that bishop, white is completely winning. So after bishop takes b4, knight takes f6 was the way to go, but in a practical game, it is very difficult to find that the queen is trapped in that combination with a very strong bishop c4. In the main game, bishop b2 was played, and the tide of the game has changed where white no longer has an attack. White went from much better, significantly better, to black has some pull. c4, trying to go all out to generate some play. But when you're up material, simplify the win. Here we could have a bit more accuracy for black. f6 was played to limit counterplay, but I'm liking the move f5, hit that bishop, and improve our dark square bishop, where we have beautiful piece harmony on the d4 pawn. f6 is very logical though. I'm up my pawn. I don't want to take any risk. I'm just going to take away all of these key squares with my pawns. I'm going to wait for you. Rook ad1. Let's get this bishop out of the way. a3. And it's not the best square for the bishop, but we're definitely solid with our structure on the queen side with this extra defender that's eyeing some squares, and we're free on the king side as well as the center to start some action. d5, white's trying to force matters. Take. Our knight's hit, so we need to move. And to white's credit, is doing everything possible to keep the position complicated, to fight to get back into the game tactically. Can we take the d5 pawn? Absolutely. Now queen c4. Gotta be careful. We don't want white to have too much control over these light squares around our king. So king b7. Again, that c6 square is a critical square. So let's just go c5, kick this knight away, make sure it's not getting in. This bishop is starting to become a liability, but we don't have the time to do anything about it, so we need to shore up the structure to make sure we're not going to have problems in the future. Let's defend the c-pawn. And rook fe1, likely an oversight. I'm thinking it's going to be better to speculate a bit with knight takes a5, and after b takes a5, rook fd1, where there's still a lot of room to go wrong for black, who's got just a little something going. You're going to have to deal with the tension for a while with moves like rook hd8 and then rook b1. Black's going to have to play accurately here to try to convert. But rook fe1, we can excuse bishop takes b4, but this one's just an outright blunder. Bishop takes e1, and now the rest should be relatively easy. When up a lot of material and your opponent doesn't have any counterplay, just completely simplify, trade pieces equally, eliminate threats. Queen e6, looking for any opportunity to trade. Queen e4, excellent play. King a8, avoiding any tactical threats with knight a5. Beautiful move. Attacks the queen, gets ready to play knight e2 check. We will be forcing material off the board. White has no way to keep tension. Queen a6. And knight e2 is definitely a move to consider, but queen a4 even stronger. Where's the queen going? And now finally knight e2, followed by takes. One less piece on the board. And white had enough, as it's just impossible to generate any counterplay. We can look for the simple plan of doubling the rooks with eventual invasion on the key squares, with more material being lost for white. So this was a nice victory over a grandmaster. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of One Move at a Time.